Okay, let's go ahead. Get started now. First off, questions. Do you have any questions about what we were doing on Monday, or any questions about anything we've done so far in the class? No? Okay, a couple of comments, and this is for the benefit of those who will be watching this as a recorded class. Everyone, I've been looking through the in-class activity report you gave me on Monday, and everyone did pretty well with this. I'd have to say everyone did fine with it. And there's a couple of things though. When we are writing out instructions, the SIG, which are the instructions to the patient, first off, we don't use numbers, we use words. So if we want someone to take one tablet, we say take one tablet. We write it out as a word. Also, we use active verbs. Take one tablet. So we wouldn't say one tablet is given. That's a passive verb. So we want to use active sort of command structure language. This is what you do. That it makes it very clear. It's the problem with anything in medication and medicine is that if people can make a mistake, if they can misunderstand you, they will. I told you about the issue of the amoxicillin in the ear. You know, most of us would think, yeah, you're going to take this by mouth, but no. People will make errors. They will misunderstand. The other is that the painkillers, such as the opioids, Percocet, Vicodin, etc., all of these things, when we write out the prescription, again, take 1 to 2 tablets every 4 to 6 hours as needed for pain. The as needed is critical. We also have to say by mouth, obviously, but the as needed part is critical because patients should not be sitting there thinking, well, I have to use all this drug. No, they don't. The only place where you have to use everything is on drugs that are for infectious disease. And the reasoning for that is that if you don't take an entire prescription, you have we know that there is a time course of these drugs, and we take the entire prescription because the first dose will kill off most of the the infectious agents. The second dose will kill off most of the rest. But when we hear most, that means that some are going to survive. And what we want to do, we deliberately dose longer than it generally takes to make certain that we have reduced the population of these infectious organisms down below a level that can be handled by our immune systems. Drugs can't kill all bacteria or viruses. In fact, we can't kill most viruses with drugs. But they can't kill them all, but we can knock the population down so that our immune systems now can take care of the rest. Our immune systems are much more efficient than drugs. Other drugs that need to be taken regularly are things like Coumadin. Everybody got that one right. You take 1 a day. If you do not, you run severe risks of clotting, leading to heart attack, stroke, etc., even pulmonary embolism. So we do want to be very, very clear about that. We also, by the way, any prescription that we have for an antibiotic or an anti-infective drug should also have on the label, use entire prescription. Because what happens with patients is they start feeling better if the drug is working. And if they have an infectious disease, they'll feel better in about 3 days. And a distressing number of patients will say, well, I don't want to take any more of these drugs, because in many cases they can't do things like have alcohol or eat certain foods. And women who take antibiotics, they almost all interfere with birth control. That doesn't mean you shouldn't take the birth control, because then you get to restart, right? The way that works. But it interferes with chemical birth control methods, which is why they tell you why they should tell you when you take antibiotics as a woman, that if you're going to engage in sexual activity, you need additional methods of prevention of pregnancy. Okay, so there are lots of warning labels go on these. You've seen them, take with food or whatever, take only at night or something like that. And so we put these on there, but one of the things about an antibiotic is take the entire prescription, because what happens is people get rebound infections. They have not done enough to reduce that population so that our immune systems can handle it. They get rebound infections, and then they're harder to treat. Some things are hard enough to treat. This is the reason we have resistant microorganisms, and why this is such a problem, is that we've overused antibiotics for decades now, scores of years now, and have created resistant organisms, which means we have to take them longer and longer and use more and more powerful antibiotics. The same with anything else. So what we want to make sure of is that we are very, very clear in our instructions, and using active verbs in our instructions is a critical part of that, making certain that the patient sees it as the direct order from the doctor. Okay. So has anyone started on this week's discussion? Okay. The first post is due tonight, so let's try and get that going today as well. But now I want to talk about this week's assignments. We're going to be doing a wide variety. We're going to bounce around in the book a bit this week. You're going to do some things that are sort of in the sequence that we've been doing. You're going to do more prescriptions. Why? Because what do you do in a pharmacy? You fill prescriptions. And there are several things that happen. Now, we have noted here that there can occasionally be problems with the software. If you're having problems with the software, simply deal with it as best you can. Let me know you're having problems so that I can grade accordingly. You should not be, your grade should not suffer because the software doesn't work. So I will take all of that into account as I go through the grading. And I do look at everything you turn in. I look at every screenshot you make. So don't hesitate, to do a lot of screenshots. Where a specific problem has multiple screenshots that would show that you were doing all the steps, take them and put them in, even though it says take a screenshot of step 17. If really to show that all of the work that was done needs to have several more, do it. Okay? So it doesn't bother me. I can quickly scan these things. I know what I'm looking for. So I can quickly scan these things. It doesn't really cost me a lot of effort to grade that. And I want to make sure that you're doing things. In part A of this week's assignments, you're going to be working with laboratories 8, 9, and 10 in your text, and you'll be doing a bit of a drug utilization review related activity. Remember, DURs were part of the discussion this week and somewhat last week. DUR meaning drug utilization review. You're going to look at obtaining an authorization for a refill. Why do we need authorizations for refill? Well, it could be too soon. It could be that the prescription is out of date. It could be that you've run out of refills and need more. It could also be that your insurance company is saying, no, we're not going to pay for that drug. There's lots of reasons we may have to go through these authorizations. Fortunately, most of them can be done online. Occasionally, we have to call the physician and say, you need to send us another prescription for this patient because we've run out of refills and can't fill it. So we have that. Then in Part B, you're going to be looking at something that does happen. That's transferring a prescription, or maybe even reversing it. Why would we reverse a prescription? Well, here's a very interesting statistic. When prescriptions are called into a pharmacy, about 40% are not ever picked up by the patients. This is kind of surprising. I mean, I don't know why that is, but nonetheless, that's the statistic. Or you may come in and the patient looks at the bill and says, oh my God, I can't afford $600 for that prescription. Give me half of it. So you have to go through and take it out of the system before you actually fill it. Can the patient do that? Absolutely. That's part of the patient rights. You can refuse. Okay. So that happens. Transferring. We have a mobile society. Fortunately, most of us don't move every time the rent man comes. But we do have a mobile society. And we also have a society, and especially among the elderly, we have what we call the snowbirds. They'll live here in Colorado through the spring, summer, and early fall. And then when winter comes, they go to Arizona or New Mexico or Hawaii or Florida. But their prescriptions have been locally processed. So we can actually transfer to a local pharmacy wherever they're going, and you'll go through that activity. That transfer takes basically the patient information for that prescription and moves it from this one pharmacy to another. That's because we don't really want the patient to have to go to another doctor, and incur all the expense and effort of getting a prescription, a local prescription. So we can transfer them. Then you'll do some work with medication therapy management. You're going to fill out a couple of forms. That's in Part C. If you take a look at the Word document for Part C, it's a fill in the blank kind of thing. So note one thing, not every piece of information is there in the assignment. Not every piece of information on the form that looks like you're supposed to put in is actually in the assignment. A lot of times we don't have that information. We may not know, for instance, the other disease status a patient has. We may not know what supplements the patient is taking. All of these things, every bit of information isn't there. We saw this with the entry screens for the doctors and the patients. We don't have all that information necessarily. And that's okay. We work with what we have. And then we'll also, you're going to do a whole series of prescriptions as Part D. And basically, this is to give you practice. Some of the prescriptions may have some issues associated with them. If you have those issues, note it on the report. The report can be typed in. So just add it to the report, and that's fine. Let me know what those issues are. If they are really issues that make it impossible to do this work, then I need to be passing that on to our corporate brethren to have them, basically pass the buck to them and say, here, fix it, because I can't. I don't have access to the software. And I will tell you, don't worry about that. I mean, the frustration for me is that I have tried for years to get the software vendor to fix some of their problems and they won't do it. So, so I don't expect any better luck out of our corporate folks, but some things might be doable. So that's what we will go through. It'll be fairly quick. I'm going to just pick a few of these. We won't go through everything because I want you to go ahead and get started. For those of you who are watching this video of this class, email me if you have any questions. Even though it's a long weekend and I probably won't be doing a whole lot of work on Monday because I'm expecting about 30 people at my house. I will over the weekend and certainly by Tuesday be taking a look and seeing what's going on. But get this done. Do some of this work before the weekend so you can actually have a chance to send questions or problems to me. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to do. And what I'm going to do for the people in the room is go ahead and put this on screen. Guess it would help if I lowered the screen. Thank you, Ron. Appreciate it. Great. I'll take a look at it later. Okay, so here are, Destiny, you're here, great. Thank you. All right, what we're doing now is looking at this week's assignments. And we're going to just quickly run through some of these in the next half hour to an hour, and then people have a chance to start catching up and doing some of the work. So if you have questions, just talk to me and I'll talk with you later about some of the other things that I talked about before you came in. Okay. So part A here is drug utilization review. Let me pull up. That's assignment B. I didn't want that. Assignment A. And let's share that one. Okay, so assignment A is to do lab 8 and then lab 9. Lab 8 is doing a DUR, drug utilization review, using the patient profiles. And so what we will do is look at go to the textbook and take a look at those. Okay. So in this particular case, we will be looking at least in the early steps. We'll take a look here at what happens when we look at what happens when we are entering a prescription that may have a problem. Here we have Karen Anderson as a patient. Her birth date is 1973. So we're going to get a drug utilization review screen come up because her current medication profile includes a birth control patch. And as we know, birth control is interfered with by most antibiotics and most antibacterial drugs. So here we have the pregnancy category list for drugs. Category A is something that we have that says basically all the clinical trial studies have not demonstrated any fetal risk in the first trimester of pregnancy. Category B, animal studies have failed to demonstrate a risk, but there's nothing in humans to make that same judgment. Animal models are something we use because we can't do everything in humans. We use a lot of rats for reproduction studies. We actually mostly will be looking at rabbits and mice and rats because they all reproduce very, very quickly. And they have large litters, and we can see any morphological changes, obvious physical changes. We use a lot of rabbits to study the genetic toxicity of drugs. In other words, is it going to interfere with the DNA and the expression of genetic information in those animals? Rabbits are real good with that, because what happens with that kind of toxicity is that it often skips generations. You will have no problem with the offspring of the doe and the buck and the rabbit in the first generation, but then the next generation may show those problems. They show problems arising. So rabbits develop rapidly and they begin reproducing very rapidly. We can do these studies fairly quickly to make that determination. This came out of some work in the 1950s and 60s on a drug that was called thalidomide. And I don't know if any of you know the thalidomide story, but thalidomide was developed as an anti-nauseant. And so it was actually looked at as an anti-nauseant. And where is one of the biggest problems with nausea? First trimester pregnancies. And so it was immediately prescribed to thousands, millions of pregnant women to treat their nausea. And what happened, tragically, was that this drug caused tremendous physical deformities in children that were born to many, not everyone, but to many of these women. Children born without arms or legs, or with flipper type structures in place of arms and legs. I knew when I was growing up, we had a kid in my high school who didn't have arms, but he had perfectly functional legs. He could do everything any of us could do with his feet, including eat. He could take food and eat. He could type on a typewriter with his toes. I mean, he was really, but he had no arms. There wasn't anything that could be done about that. Other people had other issues as well. So that prompted the FDA to start requiring that we do these kinds of genetic toxicity studies, which is why we do those now, because we understand what's going on. Category C is that animal studies have shown an adverse effect on the fetus, but there aren't any studies in humans of this kind of effect. But we have to then go back to something that is true about all drugs: risk versus benefit. The benefit to the patient versus the risk to the fetus, and then make a medical judgment as to whether or not to use the drug. Category D is positive evidence of human fetal risk exists. Okay? But again, potential benefits may warrant the use of the drug in pregnant women. Category X means that, first off, we know it causes problems, and second off, the risks definitely outweigh the benefits. And so a pregnancy category X drug cannot be given to a woman without, or even a patient in some cases, and I'll give you one of those in a minute, without taking precautions to make sure that pregnancy is not going to be something that happens while on the drug. A really outstanding example of that is a drug that's used to treat extreme cystic acne called isotretinoin. Retinol is what the drug is called. If a determination is made that this drug has to be used, we know from clinical results and from animal studies that whether this drug is given to a woman or a male, the offspring have a high probability of birth defect. So anyone given this drug, whether a woman or a man, is advised to use at least 2 different methods of birth control, chemical and a barrier method of some form. And they sign an agreement to do it. Okay, so we do have drugs that can be used, but not without making certain that pregnancy is not going to be an issue. So another thing may happen is that this drug utilization review screen pops up here for pregnancy, but it can pop up for other problems as well. And that can be a drug already in that therapeutic category being prescribed to the patient. We try not to duplicate. It happens on a regular basis, which is why it's a good idea for patients and their family members to be aware of every drug they're taking, so that they can look and say, well, why are you giving me 2 diuretics? Isn't one enough? And the answer to that that question generally is, yeah, one's enough. In fact, for most people who take diuretics, one's too many, because they don't like having to go to the bathroom 17 times a day. But that's a necessity. So you will see that kind of information as well. So when you're going through this particular process, what happens is, and we're going to look at this as the example here, you're going to click on a new prescription and then put in the name of the patient. Looking at the prescription here, let's take a look. Coumadin, 5 milligrams, okay? And the SIG, take 1 tablet by mouth every day. Usually for Coumadin is warfarin. You saw warfarin on another prescription on Monday. That's Coumadin is warfarin. It is an anti-clotting agent. It's taken by people who have a potential for clot formation. In the case of anyone who has an implanted device like a pacemaker is going to be taking this drug the rest of their lives if they tolerate it. It's a drug that, by the way, when you look at, we monitor every week during the first several months of taking this drug. They go in for an INR, a check of clotting factors in their blood. How thick is your blood? These are called blood thinners, in that they will prevent the blood from clotting spontaneously. They work by, there are a number of these kinds of drugs. They work by different mechanisms. Coumadin works by inhibition of the vitamin K step of clot formation. Daily. Now, what happens is that this is a nice ideal. I will tell you what the reality is. The reality is you're going to see a complicated SIG. That SIG might be Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you take 5 milligrams, and the other 4 days of the week, you take 2.5. So what you're writing out is take 1 tablet per day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Take 1/2 tablet per day, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. Note that I stated all the days of the week. Okay? We have to be very, very specific. This is an ideal case. This person is lucky in that Cynthia Franks is her name. This person is lucky in that she's taking the same dose every day. That's not usual for Coumadin. Coumadin is the brand name for warfarin. It says brand necessary. So we specify that. Okay? So we go down here and we take care of, we confirm all the information about the patient, and then we start entering the prescription. And what happens is we have a DUR for pregnancy, because indeed, pregnancy, a pregnancy warning comes up with Coumadin. It's a dangerous drug in pregnancy. So we have, and the pregnancy warning is trimester by trimester. So we are given a pregnancy code for each one. In this case, X. This drug should not be given to anyone, any woman, who might get pregnant. Really? Okay, what is her date of birth? 4/14/56, and today is, so 63. Yeah, it should have popped up. I mean, even though at 63 you would not anticipate this woman getting pregnant, it isn't impossible. It's just very unlikely. So there's a mistake. Okay, so please note that in your report. Okay, because that should come up. If the rest of you have that problem, please let me know. But that's what should come up. So, so in this case, what happens when one of these warnings comes up is you as the technician alert the pharmacist, because the pharmacist is going to have to counsel the patient. Now, you're going to ask the patient if they want to be counseled at any time. They have the right to say no. In this particular case, you're going to have the pharmacist come out and say, I'd like to talk to you about this drug, because it is important. Now, if you happen to know this woman and you happen to know, for instance, that her surgical history is that she's had a double hysterectomy, well, you may or may not be worried. In fact, you shouldn't be worried about pregnancy, right? So there are lots of issues around these particular kinds of things that come up. So so now you're going to keep going and choose the generic. In this case, you're going to the DAW code will be 1. The physician requires it. So again, we're going to look at the DAW codes. You're going to do in all the tabs and so forth, and fill out and fill that out. Okay. So at that point, let's take a quick look at the, yeah. Let's go back to page 67 and look at the prescription label. We're going to be looking at here. When you get through the prescription, you're going to save it, and then you'll click on the term transmit record. That means to record the prescription. You should come up with a separate new screen that has the label on it. Okay, the label will be exactly what you see on the bottle. It's like the label on the bottle, the pharmacy name, all these things, the prescription, the SIG, all that. That's what you take a print screen of. Okay. All right. Question? Okay. Now, the refill authorization, that's lab number 9 here. The refill authorization, sometimes the prescription is out of schedule. In other words, you have not filled it, you haven't done a refill in any reasonable amount of time, you need an authorization. So in this particular scenario, the customer calls in and they want a prescription refilled and no refills are authorized. So then we have to get the prescriber to do that. That's why we do these authorizations. So let's go back to the instructions here. So you're going to go through all of the material and then do the refill authorization for Nancy Davis, and then get the label, the print screen for the label. What I probably will do is pull up Visual Superscript and show you what I'm talking about in terms of printing a label for a prescription. Okay. So you'll go through all of this. We take a look here. We have what happens is when you try to refill a prescription, you can't, you need authorization, you'll get this screen, cannot refill, select copy option. So you're copying it to a new prescription. Okay, so that's what you do. Copy to a new RX, and then the authorization, then the new prescription screen will come up, and you'll assume that you've gotten the authorization because that should be a part of the process. Okay, so there are that was on what, page 70. Okay. So now we're going to do here on page 71, we should have some specific instructions for Davis. So, so you're going to do, in this particular case, you're going to do only this prescription. If we go over here, we find the, okay, so they should be written elsewhere. You'll call up the patient. You'll call up the customer history, new prescription, customer history, call it up. You'll get that list of drugs. Pick Nancy Davis's Ventolin inhaler for the drug to refill and go through the steps. Yep. Okay. When you are refilling, the SIG line should come up with whatever was in the original prescription. It doesn't? If you copy it to a new prescription, it should. However, when you are looking with an inhaler, Ventolin, let's see, I believe that is take 1 to 2 puffs as needed is the proper SIG for these inhalers. Inhalers are I don't know if anybody here has asthma or uses an inhaler for anything. If not, God bless you. You really don't want to be doing that. But if you or if you have a family member, what they do is for what they call the rescue inhaler, which is when they need to have when they're really not able to breathe and they need to open their airway. We call those bronchodilators. They'll take 1 or 2 puffs as needed to get that airway open. We call them rescue inhalers because they're not taken on schedule. They're pretty potent drugs, so we don't want them overused, as opposed to the anti-inflammatories, the corticosteroids that people with asthma take on a regular basis to try and reduce the inflammation that causes that bronchoconstriction. So we use that. So yeah, take 1 or 2 puffs as needed would be the SIG for that. Also, when you are, by the way, if you ever are looking at a patient going onto an inhaled drug, we have to train them because every different type of inhaler is different in the way it works. Okay. So we have to train our patients in how to use the very specific inhaler that they're getting. All right, questions? Okay. Okay, prior authorization, that's part of the first, that's part of part A. Every insurer has what they call a formulary, which is to say the drugs that they will reimburse for, the drugs they will pay for. We have preferred drugs. If a medication is not in the formulary, it's called a non-preferred drug, and the insurance company often will require additional documentation. Used to be they'd simply refuse to pay for it, but there have been a number of different times when people have prevailed in complaints against the insurance business for not paying for life-saving drugs. Now, you may have to pay a lot. In the first discussion Monday of week 1, right? I talked about an incident that I witnessed at a pharmacy of a patient just literally panicking because they couldn't afford to pay about $600 for a drug that was being prescribed. And there were clear HIPAA violations because I was standing nearby talking with a different technician, and the conversation was quite clear. It was also loud enough that the people actually standing 10 feet behind the little sign that says "Don't come any closer" could hear the conversation. It turned out that I didn't complete the story because it actually gets more complicated. It turned out that I knew this drug, not from personal experience, but because of my years in the pharmaceutical industry. And I knew the company that manufactured it. And so I actually inserted myself into the conversation and said to the technician and the patient, suggesting that they call the company. I named the company, suggested that they call them and asked to speak to the people in their patient assistance department, because every pharmaceutical company has a patient assistance program for people who cannot afford to buy their drugs. And they will often cover some significant portion to all of the cost of a drug. So they, you know, even the technician didn't seem to know this, which kind of surprised me. But these people were very happy. Well, then a woman standing back behind the sign said, yes, my daughter had the same problem. Here's another HIPAA violation, right? Except that it's the person saying it is not a medical person. So she said, yes, my daughter had the same problem. We contacted the company and they paid for the drug. So, you know, this story, you know, goes on. So by inserting myself, I'm not sure that I wasn't committing a HIPAA violation, basically by getting into the conversation. But this woman was so distressed. And it was a drug for anxiety. And she didn't need any more anxiety. So it was, you know, these scenarios work. So insurance companies will do that. So the authorization process is something to go through as well. So if we look at the example here, we have a drug, Celebrex. Celebrex is actually, this is old. Celebrex is now off the market. But we won't go there right now. Celebrex was a drug that was developed as a replacement for aspirin. It's in a category known as cyclooxygenase 2 inhibitors. And aspirin's an interesting story. Even though it was discovered in the 1880s, it was the 1980s before we knew how the drug worked. And we found that out by some research that was done that showed that it inhibited an enzyme called cyclooxygenase 1. So that then led to the development of cyclooxygenase or COX-2 inhibitors. Celebrex was the first one. There were 3 or 4 others. They had enormous toxicity problems. And the only one that was left on the market for a long time was Celebrex. And the only reason it was there is that some people actually needed a COX-2 inhibitor with all the warnings that went with it. It is now, I think I heard about 5 years ago, it was actually pulled off the market as well. But in this case, they're drugs that the insurance companies don't like to pay for because they are hideously expensive. So in this case, you'd have to get prior approval from the insurance, and the doctor would be expected to justify. Brand necessary because this is not a necessary statement because I don't think there were ever any generics for Celebrex. So we go ahead and again, click Fill RXs, click New RX, etc. Type in the customer name, validate the date of birth, right? And then bring in the customer and all the information for there should appear. So we type CEL, return, gives us Celebrex on the prescription page. Remember that what happens when you type in a name is it will produce any generics that are in your pharmacy. Pharmacies don't carry every generic version of every drug. So generally you'll have 1 or maybe at max 2 generic versions, plus you may have a brand name version. So when you type it in, you're going to get, if there is a generic, you're going to get the generic listing and it will come up with the brand name as well. So you look at the prescription. If it says brand name only, click in the drop down that occurs after you type in the drug name in the list below, click on the product, the appropriate product. If the prescription allows generics, click on a generic. Okay. Now, last week, one of the problems was to fill a prescription for Inderal. And I think it was Inderal 20 milligrams or something, maybe 40, I can't remember. But you type in IND and you don't get Inderal. You don't get an Inderal 40. What you get is a listing of Inderal XR 80 milligram. XR is extended release. Inderal non-extended release is not marketed anymore under the brand name. What you need to do is, when you don't see a generic, because there is no generic Inderal XR, when you don't see a generic and no generic names pop up, that's a problem in the software. So what you want to do is do a search. What is Inderal? Well, it's a drug called propranolol. It was the first of the beta blockers. If you did a search for propranolol, you will find the proper 20 or 40 milligram tablet or whatever it is they were prescribing in that particular one. You'll find that. So then you would use the generic propranolol as the name. Always look at the prescription. Always choose the appropriate drug. Brand name if brand is called for. Generic name if there is either no notation about brand name or if it specifically says generics allowed. If there's no notation, brand only, generics are allowed. That's the assumption. So that's something to make sure you do on all prescriptions. Okay, so we look at the DAW code and enter that appropriately as well. You'll see your textbook brings up the list every single time, so you're going to choose one. Key in the, remember to put in spaces. When you're keying in the instructions, remember to put in spaces at the right place. You don't put a space necessarily between 1 and C, although I think that does work. And it should translate it into English. If it doesn't, then you go back and take a look and see what's missing. Remember that a physician may or may not put in the route of administration. In fact, a lot of physicians are kind of lazy. They assume that people know that you take capsules and tablets by mouth. We do not make that assumption in the pharmacy. Okay. So enter all of this. And looking at days supply, if you have to calculate it for some reason, here's the formula: total number of tablets prescribed by the number of total that are taken per day. So you go up here to Celebrex. Let's go back and look at the prescription. Let's see. It says take one twice a day, and then we're going to give them 60. So they're taking 2 per day. Total number prescribed is 60. We take 2 per day, so it's a 30-day supply of drug. So we can calculate that if the system doesn't calculate it directly. And there are times when it calculates it just fine, and other times when we have to do it ourselves. And I apologize for that, but that's just it. So then we save it, and then we transmit or record it. Okay. So your instructions for that are to what comes up after you transmit or record it. It should be a label, and you may have to print push the label. We'll do an example of this later. Hey, Cody. How are you? All right. Yeah, and when are you available? Okay, well, we're going to take a break. How about after the break? Okay, so that's okay. So that's part A, and then Cody's going to come in about some computer issues. So what we'll do is stop here and take a break. I wasn't paying attention to time. When it's time to take a break and I'm on a roll, let me know, because I don't much pay attention to the time. Okay, but you are supposed to take a break at 9, 10, and 11. Okay, and after that, Cody's going to come in and talk about some computer issues. So I will be recording that as well. Again, all right, we're going to go through and take a look at how we put in a prescription. So let's go back and make sure. Okay, so we don't have. Okay. So let's take a look at what happens here when we need to do a utilization review and get a prior authorization, et cetera, on a patient. So I'm going to pick on Abstin, and we have Otezla, 30 milligram, 1QD, number 30, brand, 0 refills. Copying all this information so I don't have to go back and forth all the time. So I want to go over here now to the software. And let's see. This was something that I want to get out of here and go back to, and the way to do that is to escape out. All right, so we want to go to fill prescriptions. Okay, what's going on here? Cancel that. We're going to fill prescriptions and we're going to do a new prescription. So it puts in the date. You can put your initials here as, if they call for it, as the technician. So the prescription I'm going to do is for Abstin. And we have this patient. Double click on that. All right. We'll have to see if this is going to work. So we don't have a doctor. All right. Thank you very much. That was no help. So we may want to do a different patient after all. All right, we're boarding that. We're going to do a new one here. The patient is going to be Natalia Acevedo. Okay, we have insurance information. We have a doctor's name. So now we want to go to the drug. And the drug is the Jardiance 10 milligram tablet that was ordered. We're going to accept that. It is Okay. So we have Jardiance is the drug. So now if we click on Jardiance, it's going to give us the manufacturer name, NDC package, and what we want to do actually is look at this and look at the refills is 0. The number was 30. So we have that. The SIG is take 1 tablet by mouth each day. That was the prescribed days. Supply is 30. And if we just click on the tab, it will fill that in. I want to recalculate the price. We need that. Okay. So we have the price calculated. And now we have the prescription filled. The NPI number was put in when we got finished with that process. We have no other notes or any other information. So we save it, and now we transmit it, and it's rejected, probably on a formulary issue. So it's rejected. We close this. We're going to make changes and resubmit. We should, let's transmit that. It's rejected. What is the issue? Rejection code. Prior authorization is required. So we're going to make changes and submit, and we're going to do a prior authorization form. Prior authorization code is 1. And the number we put in by default for this program is 7, 11 times. Okay, so we have that done. So we have the prior authorization code has gone in. Make sure that this rejection code matches the rejection code you were given. In this case, it's the insurance rejection. So we submit that now. Now we should transmit and record. Note that it says paid. I want you, go ahead and take a shot of this screen and put that in when you actually have it. So we have all of this. Now, one thing I want to note is that we have this now. The claim status is taken. We now close this. We have lost the prescription number. We can't print the label. Okay, so we should be recording the prescription number. In this case, I believe it was going to be 186534. To print a label, we have to have a prescription number. So we type in, I think this was, as I said, 186534. And don't try to print it, okay? If we do the tab, it should give us the right date. Let's do a preview. This is the label screen that you print if they tell you to take a shot of the label. Do not say print. You'll get a message that says it's not set up to print. So the preview is what we do. Take your screenshot of this. And then in order to get out of this, hit escape. Okay? Then you can cancel. Okay. And then you're back to an empty prescription screen. So that is how we do this. Okay. So that is what we'll be looking for. Lab B involves Lab 11, refilling, transferring. The instructions for that are pretty clear, okay, for how to do that. when we go to now, excuse me, we go now to lab C. Let's take a look at those. Okay, this is lab 17. So you'll have to go back in your textbook. We look at this. Let's do a screen share. Okay, if we look at this in the textbook, it tells you to go to pages to lab 17. So the way we get to that is to, hey Dan. Pardon? It's 11:05. Okay, let's take a second break. And are necessary. We have to look for the document that we're after. And in this case, we're looking at lab C. And let's go here and change the sharing on this. All right, so we're changing. So here we have a medication record. We enter the text that we can from the patient record. If we do not have some of that information, we just don't enter it. And a lot of the information we simply won't have. Drugs, the patient may not be taking very many drugs. Just enter what you have. So filling out this information on this is all we need. And again, for lab number 19, follow the procedures for the drug label that I gave you. Remember, it's a good idea to record the prescription number if you know that you're going to have to print the label, because remember, you have to enter the prescription number to print the label. If you forget to record the prescription number, simply go into the customer history file and call up their drugs, and they give you the prescription number there, so you can simply find it that way. So call up the right customer name, get the prescription that way, and then go back and print the file, print the label. You do not have to be in a prescription to print the label. Just go to the new prescription page and click print label. It will give you that little box that allows you to put the prescription number into it. Okay? So do all of that. And lastly, part D is filling out a bunch of prescriptions. This is for practice, but you'll have a lot of different things. Lab 47. Lab 47, again, we have to go back to the table of contents. And I think Lab 47. Is that a mistake? Let me just take a quick look. Customer history report. Okay, that's going to be in reports. So let's go back now. Go back to the table of contents and documentation. So lab 47 is in documentation. Customer history report. You can call this up and then do that lab. These things are fairly straightforward. Just print the report. Just give me a print screen of the report. Okay, so questions? No questions? Okay. So for the rest of this morning, we've got a little bit less than an hour of class left. I want you to start working on these assignments so that if you run into problems, we can deal with them right now and get you prepared, okay?